What is a buyer's agent? Do you need a buyer's agent? What does a buyer's agent do? I'm super excited that I'm doing a 3-part series on what is a buyer's agent. Today, contracts and contingencies. Stay tuned. All right, and I'm super excited to be doing part 2 of my 3-part series, What is a Buyer's Agent? If you missed it last time, check out part 1. That is the process from front to end, start to finish, everything involved in the process and how your buyer's agent can help you along the way. And today we are going to be diving into contracts and contingencies. There is a ton of contracts and contingencies that are normally included when you are ready to make an offer to purchase. And so I'm Kelly Doyle with Kelly Doyle Homes and Realty Executives. Let's dive in. I'm going to start with the residential offer to purchase. And so that's the WB11, the form that you're actually going to use when you are ready to make an offer. So let's see what's in here. Items included. This is definitely something you are going to want to understand at a high level, because there is nothing worse than when you are all excited to go to your home that you're about to close on and you do that final walkthrough and you're like, hey, where did that fireplace go? And come to find out, that fireplace was actually not a fixture. It was not attached to the house, and it was kind of just a little electrical box that got plugged into the wall, and the seller took it with them. And you are super bummed, because that was like a big reason why you liked the living room, was that ambiance that that little fireplace gave, and the sellers took it. Well, maybe you didn't write it in as an item that needed to be included. And so often when I'm going through my houses with my buyers, you know, sometimes I'll grab onto things and shake them just to see if they're attached to the house, because anything attached to the house is considered a fixture, and fixtures normally are staying with the house. So things like shelving in a garage or a basement are, you know, important to know if those are staying or going, because, you know, who doesn't love a bunch of shelving for storage? And, you know, if you're thinking that all of these things are staying and then you go and then the seller took them all because they weren't actually attached, that can be a letdown. And so it's just really important to know what items are included, what can you expect to stay, and what items are not included, and what would you expect to go. That can eliminate any negative surprises that might happen right before the closing. Binding acceptance. This is another thing I just wanted to highlight real quick in the residential offer to purchase. Binding acceptance, if we were writing the offer today, let's say we went and looked at a bunch of houses just now and we're getting ready to write an offer, normally a typical time frame for making the offer and giving the seller time to respond is about 24 hours. That time frame can obviously change. Maybe you're writing a really aggressive offer and you're in competition and the house is getting a lot of activity, and you put in this amazing offer and you really want a quick time frame, so maybe that would be less than that. Or maybe you really came in low and you want to give them a couple days to think about it because you're not budging and it's kind of low, so here you go, sit on this for a day or two. You might do that too. It's just up to you when we make the offer how long you want to give the seller to accept the offer. Now that is just for acceptance. It's called binding acceptance. If the seller chooses to counter, they can counter at any time. Really, they can counter at any time. And so that could be beyond that time frame, it could be within that time frame. There's no control really at that point, but your offer is only good for how long you put in the binding acceptance. And so if you don't get a response within that time frame, then you are free to go on your merry way. Closing, that's important, right? We all need to know, when is the closing date going to happen? Well, you decide that when you make the offer. You have to write in a date to say when the closing is actually going to happen. The closing can be affected by various things: your loan and how long the lender needs, how long you need for all the contingencies that you wrote in the offer. The closing, you know, typically if we were, again, writing the offer today, normally the closing would be anywhere from about 30 to 60 days from today. And a 30-day closing is usually a pretty quick closing, or on the quicker side. 60 days is further out. So a lot of times they fall kind of in the middle of those two time frames. However, that you could do a closing sooner than that if you're a cash buyer or your lender is incredibly speedy. If you have a loan mortgage that you're doing, you can close sooner than that. It's just depends on what the contingencies are and how much time you need to get everything done. So you put in the closing date. That is definitely something the seller can counter if they need a different closing date, and sometimes it is up for dispute. But that is another part of the offer that you're definitely going to need to know when you're making an offer on a house. Earnest money. What is earnest money? Have you heard of earnest money before? Maybe you wrote an offer a few years ago and you know you've been in your house a while and you're vaguely remembering, oh yeah, what's earnest money? Or maybe this is your first time putting in an offer and you've never heard of that term ever. Earnest money is kind of just that. It shows that you're earnest. You're an earnest buyer. You're serious about buying the house. And because you're serious about moving forward with what you put in your offer, if you accept this offer, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I will give you so much money as kind of just a little bit down. Typically, the earnest money is about 1% to 2% of the purchase price. So if you were buying a $300,000 house, let's say, that would be $3,000 earnest money would be pretty typical. Now you can do more earnest money if you want, you can do less earnest money if you want. The important thing is that most sellers are going to want to see something for earnest money because they do want to know that you have some skin in the game and that your intent is earnest. Sorry to keep using that word, but for lack of a better term, that is exactly what it is. It's exactly like it says, and typically we give that upon acceptance within a couple days. So it's not something you want to be sprung on you later, like you just wrote an offer and then, somebody's asking you for money, you're like, wait, what was that? You definitely want to be clear about the terms that you put in the offer, and that after acceptance you are going to have to ante up maybe a couple $1,000s, right away after acceptance within that first week normally, just to show that you are serious about moving forward. Okay, and now we're on to the real estate condition report. I love the real estate condition report. What's a real estate condition report? The real estate condition report is a form that the seller fills out themselves. And the offer basically just states that the seller agrees to do this, and most often the sellers already have one filled out when they list their property for sale. And so usually when we're even looking at the house, we'll have a copy of that real estate condition report. And why it's so great is because it tells us all of the knowledge that the seller has about any defects in the home. And so it's worded like, the seller's filling this out, are you aware of defects in the plumbing, the electrical, leaks in the basement, etc., etc., etc. It's a pretty long form, actually. It's a few pages, and the seller fills that out to the best of their ability. And it's just nice as the buyer to have all that wonderful information, especially if the seller's been there a really long time. If you are lucky enough to have a seller that's been in the home for 20 years, that's just so great because they know so much about the home, and that's a lot different than if the seller has only been there for 2 years. You're not getting a huge history of the home at that point. And so sometimes I'll try to dig and find an old condition report from a previous seller that was maybe there a little bit longer, just to, again, give us more of a background and a history on kind of any issues that have happened in this house. Mostly because we're in Wisconsin and I want to know if that basement has leaked or not. But that real estate condition report is so important to have because it might change your mind about buying that house. Maybe you love it, and then we look at the condition report and it says, hey, the basement leaks in heavy rains. Maybe that's okay with you. Maybe it leaks just in the unfinished portion and it goes right into the drain and you're okay with that. Or maybe you want to run for the hills. You hear that and you're like, I'm out of here. That is okay too. It's just your preference, and that's good information for you to know. Or maybe we find out that there's a crack in the foundation and you can have those repaired. And so maybe that's something you want to ask the seller to do. Maybe it's something you're okay doing later on. It's just all that good information to know, what's broken, what's defective. And you might be wondering, so what classifies as a defect? Well, I'm glad you asked. A defect is actually defined in the real estate condition report. So that form that the seller fills out defines what a defect is. And in case you're curious, I'm going to tell you all about it. So the defect definition in the real estate condition report goes something like this. A defect means a condition that would have a significant adverse effect on the value of the home. So we're talking money. So something that would significantly adversely affect the value of the home. Okay, that's the first part. Second part, a condition that would significantly impair the health or safety of future occupants living in the premise. So something that would impair the health or safety of people living in the home. Or a condition that, if not repaired, removed, or replaced, would significantly shorten or adversely affect the expected normal life of the premise. So something like a value, like something that would have a negative effect of the value, an adverse effect on people living there, or if not replaced, repaired, or removed, would shorten or adversely affect the expected normal life of the premise. So that is how the real estate condition report defines what is a defect. So there you go. A second part of that, though, that's important as well, is anything that's on that real estate condition report is not on the table for our home inspection. So let's say we're getting a home inspection. If you are, let's say you're getting a home inspection. Anything that you have prior knowledge of is not on the table for that home inspection. That is kind of crazy and maybe something you didn't know. And it's important to know these things. When you are drafting an offer, you want to know what you're getting into, and you want to know things like this because maybe the real estate condition report has something in there about, we were talking about leaks, so let's just keep going down that avenue. Let's say it says there is a crack in the basement foundation wall, and that's all it says. And so we don't know if they've had issues with it. You know, we're at the house, we're looking at it. Does it look like it's leaked? Is it a big crack? Is it a small crack? You know, is the foundation shifting? You know, we're checking it out, right? Ultimately, let's say you decide, okay, well, we forgot about the crack. Okay, yep, we know about the crack. Okay, let's go get our home inspection. Hey, home inspector, what do you think? Oh, this is a crack. You're gonna need somebody to look at. It's, you know, structurally problematic, blah, 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 blah. Anything we knew about is not on the table for that home inspection. So you really have no leg to stand on to ask the seller to do anything about that crack because you already knew about it. So that's really important too. You don't want to just gloss over that real estate condition report. You want to read it, make sure you understand it, ask questions if you need to, and if you're not okay with any of those issues, you need to address those in the offer to purchase and make sure that you're covered. And so you don't have to just ignore something that maybe you are concerned about later but are unable to. So moving along, let's jump into the home inspection. We were just talking about that. So maybe you'll decide you want to get a home inspection. Many buyers do decide that they would like to have the home professionally inspected by a Wisconsin licensed home inspector. And that's not a bad idea at all. It's a great idea to have somebody thoroughly vet the house and poke around in places that maybe we just don't while we're showing and looking at the house. Home inspectors will, you know, take the furnace apart, they'll take the electrical apart, they'll go in the attic, they'll check outlets, they'll run plumbing. All these things are probably important to you. They'll go around the outside of the house, they'll look at the roof, they look at the venting, the airflow, all those kinds of things that inspectors do. There's a long list, I'm sure, that they have as far as all the things that they check out. So if you decide that you want to put a home inspection contingency in the offer, that's great. You just want to make sure that you understand what the home inspection allows you to do and what it doesn't allow you to do. Home inspections only allow you to inspect, and so they don't allow you to test for anything. So if you did want to test for something, let's say you want to test for radon, or there's some other thing out there that you want to test for, you do not have the right to test for that thing underneath or included it or as part of your home inspection. Those are two totally different things. And so that's really important too. So you have to understand that your home inspection is one thing and testing is a whole separate animal. So home inspection allows us to inspect. So you get your home inspector in there, and per the offer, you know, maybe our time frame is anywhere from 10 to 15 days, let's say. Let's say we have a 14-day home inspection contingency. The important thing to know is that you have 14 days to get that home inspection and 14 days to come to an agreement with the seller, signed in writing by all parties, about anything that's going to be fixed, repaired, or any credits or price adjustments that are made. So if you wait to get your home inspection on day 13 of our 14-day home inspection, that leaves you one day to try to work it out with the seller. And I don't know about you, but sometimes sellers aren't super happy to find out that stuff in their house is broken. They didn't know that was broken. They didn't want to fix it. They're moving. They don't want to put a dime into their house. Totally reasonable, right? As a buyer, though, you're buying this. You want everything fixed and you want everything perfect, right? Home inspection is not to give you a perfect home. It's to give you knowledge about defects in the home. And so You just want to have time to be able to work it out with the seller. Or maybe you need to get a plumber in there to look at something. Or maybe you need to get an electrician or a chimney person in there to look at something and give you a quote on something. All of that's really important. And if you only have one day to try to figure all that out, it's going to get stressful and you probably aren't going to have time to do everything. So the sooner that you can get the home inspection, the better, because that gives us more time to negotiate with the seller. It gives us more time if we do need to get another contractor in there. And that just hopefully helps us, work it out to a point where you're feeling comfortable about moving forward, the seller's agreeing as well, and we're sailing towards the closing. Another part of that home inspection is something called the right to cure. The right to cure is something that you're definitely going to want to understand at a high level, and that's usually something that's a little lengthy to talk about. But basically, to sum up, the right to cure basically dictates who can call the deal dead under a home inspection. And so when you're making an offer, you can say sellers shall or shall not have a right to cure the defects. And going one way with that would give the seller the opportunity to call the deal dead. Going another way with that would give you the opportunity to call the deal dead. It's really important to know which way you wrote the offer, because you don't want to go into that home inspection thinking, I have the ability to call this deal dead. I have the right to get out. If you don't have the right to do that, then you need to know that. And so you definitely want to make sure that you're clear and you're understanding that contingency and who has the ability to do what and who has the ability what not to, they can't do. Moving along. Okay, maybe you have a financing contingency. Are you planning on getting a mortgage, or do you got the cash? If you have the cash, then you probably don't need the mortgage. But maybe you so choose to anyway, just because you want to. That's not uncommon. The financing contingency is there because the whole offer is contingent upon you getting that loan. And so that's really important, right? The whole offer is contingent upon you obtaining that mortgage, getting approved, getting the letter, getting the A-OK. So it's a big deal, right? And so the seller wants to know, what kind of financing are you doing? They want to know, how much down payment do you have? They want to know, how solid of a buyer you are. How confident are they in your ability to get the mortgage? Because, financing contingencies take a while. A typical financing contingency could be 30 days, maybe shorter, maybe longer. However, 30 days, if you wrote that in, that's a long time for a seller to take their house off the market and then, find out you can't get a loan. Wow, I just wasted almost 30 days on the market. That stinks. And so a financing contingency, is important. It protects the buyer, and the seller needs to know what kind of buyer they're, maybe accepting. And so the financing contingency details things like your down payment. It tells them what your loan amount is, and so they could calculate out what your down payment is. It details what interest rate cap you have. You put an interest rate cap in your financing contingency so that if you're not able to lock in at a certain rate, you are protected there, because typically your payments are based largely on a certain interest rate. And so if that interest rate were to skyrocket and dramatically increase your payments, that's something you need to know, and maybe something you wouldn't be comfortable with. It just details all that kind of thing. And so a financing contingency is important. It's very common if a buyer is obtaining a mortgage, and it's definitely something that you're going to want to know. And if you haven't watched part 1, the process, I talk in there the importance of understanding your payments and what your interest rate is and all that kind of stuff with your lender, and to make sure that you are hooked up with a good lender so you don't have a lot of questions when you do get to this. You don't want to be filling out the offer and then looking like a deer in the headlights because you have no clue about any of this. You want to make sure that your lender explains it all and that you're feeling really confident and clear about your financing. And let's piggyback on that. The appraisal contingency is another contingency that you may or may not have in your offer. And most lenders will require an appraisal contingency. And that's because a lender wants a third party, kind of unrelated to the whole process here, to tell the lender if they think that the house is worth what the buyer is paying. And so it's kind of the way the lender protects themselves. If they're going to finance and give you all this financing on this home, they want to make sure that that asset is in fact worth it. And so occasionally cash buyers can get appraisals too. Maybe they just want a third party's opinion on the value of the home. Maybe they're concerned that it's overpriced or something along those lines. So that appraisal is just to say, hey, we're going to hire this third party to tell us if in their opinion this house is worth what we're paying. And there's an option that you can give the seller the right, if you so choose, to reduce their price. Seller, you don't have to, but you give them the option, if you'd like, to reduce their price if you find out that the buyer's appraisal comes in low. Let's say it's a crazy competitive situation, and let's say the price really kind of started to skyrocket. If in that situation you get the appraisal and the appraisal report comes back, and let's say it comes $5,000 less than the purchase price, you may have decided to give the seller the right, say, hey seller, if you'd like to reduce the price $5,000, you can, and then we'll move forward. The seller certainly doesn't have to. They may choose to. They may say, hey, let's work it out. I'll chip in half, you chip in half. They could say all sorts of things. But ultimately, if the seller says no, you then have the ability to get out of the deal. And the main reason being is because you might not want to buy the house if your lender will only give you a loan based off the appraised value. And if that's a big difference between the appraised value between that and what the actual purchase price is, you essentially are going to have to come up with that additional amount of money. And that might be uncomfortable. That might not even be possible. Maybe you don't have it. It changes things. And so that appraisal contingency in there is to protect you and to verify that the value of the house is in fact worth it in a third party's opinion. Since we were talking about sellers, let's talk about, let's say you're buying a house and you have a house to sell. Well, there's all these things that we can include in the offer to purchase that details how this whole process is going to go. And in efforts to not have your eyes gloss over and to keep you paying attention, I'm just going to go through this real quickly. But basically, when you have a buy and sell situation and you make an offer contingent upon your house selling, most oftentimes that offer is what we call bumpable. What? You can bump me? What's bumpable? I didn't know I could get bumped out. Yes, you can. And so it's really important if you do have that buy and sell situation. It's a little bit of a dance, and there's a lot of scenarios and situations and options that you have when making the offer, as far as if you want to have that subject to sale, and normally if you want to make it bumpable. And that's usually the only way you could get a seller to go for it. However, there are many plethora of options that you can look into to see what financing options there are and other avenues that you might want to go down. But ultimately, if the offer that you're writing on the house is contingent upon your house selling, your offer could be bumpable. That means another buyer could come in, get an accepted offer with the seller in a secondary position. The seller would go back to you and say, hey, get that subject to sale out of here, or you're out of here. And ultimately then you have the decision to say, okay, we'll remove our subject to sale if you're able to do that. Maybe you're not able to do that. So then, sorry to say, you're out of there. And so then you could get bumped. And so that's really important for you to know, because you don't want to be surprised with that. You don't want to think, yeah, I just got an accepted offer, and then 2 weeks later you get bumped out, and oh my gosh, we have an accepted offer on our house and we just got bumped and now we're homeless. This is very bad. And so you want to understand that whole process before you even get into it. Okay, and just one last thing that I want to touch on the residential offer to purchase, and then we'll dive into maybe just one or two other contracts that we may or may not come across, is occupancy. Occupancy generally is at time of closing. However, most of the time. So it could be before, occupancy could be before closing, or occupancy could be after closing. I do see that once in a while now. However, the main thing that I like to point out under the occupancy is that the house has to be in broom swept condition. And that's it. So that's really important for you to know, because broom swept condition might not meet your standards. You might want that house to be top to bottom professionally cleaned, and I totally understand that. It's just that per the contract, the seller is not obligated to have that done. And so if you are somebody that really wants to have the house professionally cleaned, you might want to prepare or make plans to do that yourself before you move in, or maybe you want to put something in the offer that dictates that the seller must do that. Or maybe you're okay just cleaning it yourself. Most sellers are really good about cleaning their homes, but I just like to point that out because, again, if you watch my part 1 on the process, I do not like surprises because usually surprises are a bad thing. And so I don't want us going through the final walkthrough right before we're buying the house and we're so excited, the big day's tomorrow, and that house is a little dirtier than you thought it was gonna be. That refrigerator did not get wiped out. Microwave, the oven. I mean, these things can happen, and per the contract, the seller had to have it in broom swept condition. And so, yeah, it's a good thing for you to know. And then there are additional contracts that we attach to the offer to purchase just to really make your head spin. Just kidding, not really. But there's additional forms. There's an addendum S, the lead-based paint addendum, and that's for homes that were built prior to 1978. That's important if you're looking at older homes that you might come across that. And you have the option to test for lead in the paint if that's important to you. And so you want to make sure that you understand what that addendum S says and whether or not that's something you would want to do. Another form we talked about already was the real estate condition report. And then there's other addendums that we might attach that are kind of like a miscellaneous form, kind of a catch-all form. Each office often has their own kind of miscellaneous catch-all form. And those miscellaneous forms encompass various things that may or may not come up in your transaction. A couple things that you might be familiar with seeing out there are things like a home warranty. Sometimes sellers will offer up a home warranty, saying that a 1-year home warranty will be included at the closing. Other times, maybe it's not offered up, but it's something you want to ask for. So that's going to be a provision you're going to want to add. Other things that you might see, a lot of newer subdivisions have things called like subdivision restrictions, and subdivision restrictions may or may not jive with what you want to do in that property. Maybe you have a camper, maybe you want to put up a fence, maybe you have a boat you want to park in your driveway. Certain subdivision restrictions are not going to allow you to do that, and so you need to know that before you get involved in that subdivision, if it's going to allow you or not allow you to do what you want to do in the house. So there's even other forms that encompass things if we're rural and it's a rural property. There's an addendum B that talks about well and septic and testing for the water and nitrates in the water and arsenic and bacteria, and talking about the well system and doing all that and inspecting the septic. And so we have the residential offer to purchase, but then we also have all these other really great forms that just kind of encompass all these various things: joint well agreement, joint driveway agreement, various things. If you're buying a condo docs, maybe you want more condo docs than are just in the actual offer to purchase, because it's a kind of a smaller list than maybe all the information that you would want, because you want a more clear, big picture of the condo association that you're purchasing into. All kinds of things. And so there's definitely most often a form for something that we need. And so it's just tailored to you in your situation and what kind of home you're buying, what's important to you, and what you need to feel good about buying that home. So I'm super excited that you watched part 2. Make sure you check out part 3 of What is a Buyer's Agent. Part 3 is going to all be about negotiation, and what a buyer's agent can do for you and how they can advocate for you and why it's so great to have a buyer's agent in your corner. That's going to be a fun one, so be sure not to miss that. And again, if you didn't check out part 1, be sure to check out part 1, the process front to end, start to finish. How does a buyer's agent help you walk through your home purchase journey? I'm Kelly Doyle with Kelly Doyle Homes and Realty Executives. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll check you next time.